Welcome back, everyone. Could all take your seats, please. And we've got a very full afternoon, and we're going to start immediately with Professor Peter Skilling, a long-term resident of Thailand. Peter is a professor at the French School of Asian Studies, the École française d'Extrême-Orient, based in the Bangkok office. A long-term scholar of Pali studies, particularly Pali and Sanskrit, but a long-term fellow of the Pali Text Society in London, sometime curator of the Pali Text Society. Began his career indeed as a Buddhist monk in the early 1970s. The paths led him to this particular vocation. So Professor Skilling will be talking to us on Inscribing Buddhism, Art and Epigraphy in Early Southeast Asia. Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to start by thanking profusely the Metropolitan Museum of Art for arranging this splendid, groundbreaking exhibition and this stimulating symposium. At least it was stimulating so far, up to now. And also for producing an exceptional catalogue. These thanks, of course, go warmly to John Guy and the many members of the Metropolitan staff who have helped to make the exhibition a resounding success, for making the Lost Kingdoms a great discovery for the public, and for putting early Southeast Asian art on the map, or for putting New York in the map of Southeast Asia, whatever. To give you a potted survey of the Buddhist inscriptions of mainland Southeast Asia in 25 minutes is difficult. In fact, it is impossible. After a very brief overview, I will focus on Thailand, ancient Siam, and its early Buddhist epigraphy. My topic is inscriptions, mostly on stone and metal. Inscriptions are the only written records that we have for the early period of Buddhism in mainland Southeast Asia. It's relevant to point out that the situation is more or less the same for early South Asia, India, Pakistan, Ceylon, Bangladesh, Nepal. For today's purposes, let us define this troublesome word early as the dates covered by the Lost Kingdoms exhibition, that is the 5th to the 8th centuries CE, give or take a century or two, either way. Precision. Dates are one of our many problems. Almost none of the inscriptions that I will discuss today bears a secure date. The inscriptions may be dedicatory, that is, sponsorship statements by individuals or groups, declarations of acts of religious merit, or they may be citations from Buddhist texts. Give it a try. There's a rich corpus of Brahmanical, Hindu, if you like, inscriptions, and some are certainly impressive, such as those on the huge natural border beside a tumbling river in Hup Khao Chongkhoi, Nakhon Si Thammarat. These, however, are beyond my brief. I do want to note and to stress that epigraphists have to take all related records into account in the effort to understand more completely the complex context of whatever inscribed record they, or I should say we, are studying. To isolate the records of one or the other religions can lead to oversimplification. The languages used in mainland Southeast Asian inscriptions are the classical, liturgical, and scriptural languages of early Jambudvipa. That's the broader area of India. That is Pali, Sanskrit, and Prakrit. There are also regional vernacular languages here: Old Mon, Old Khmer, and Pew. The scripts used in the early period derived from southern Brahmi of India. We might call the main script Southeast Asian Brahmi. There are some traces of the North Indian Gupta script, and nearer the end of the period, we also meet the North Indian Siddhamatrika. Many of these points have been very well discussed this morning by my colleague Arlo Griffiths. But note that there are no known indigenous writing systems. In Southeast Asia, the classical languages of India are written in Indic scripts, and the old languages of Southeast Asia are written in scripts derived and adapted from Indic scripts. They all belong to the Jambudvipa cultural complex. Note also that, even though our area may also be called Indochina, early epigraphic records in Chinese are very rare indeed. Some points of contrast: script, language, source texts, and broad epigraphic practices come from India, that is, India writ large. But if Buddhist epigraphic practice overlaps that of India, we need to bear in mind, first of all, that Indian or Southeast Asian practice itself was by no means homogeneous, and that Southeast Asian Buddhists had their own agendas and made their own choices and decisions. They were active agents, not simply passive recipients. One subject that is popular in the study of Buddhism is school affiliation. What Buddhist schools, what monastic orders were active, where and when, in Southeast Asia or in India or anywhere in the ancient world? In Southeast Asia, at Mathura, in Gandhara, and in Andhra, donative inscriptions sometimes mention the Buddhist school or monastic order to which an offering is made. Can our Southeast Asian inscriptions help us in this subject? Do they tell us what Buddhist schools were active in the region? No, I'm afraid they do not. Not even a single inscription mentions the name of any school or order. Is this because contemporary socio-religious context did not require it? A body of assumptions about the school affiliation of the Sangha in Southeast Asia has grown up in over a century of scholarship. Many of these assumptions are wrong, many are irrelevant, and the few sound ones still remain hypotheses. As mentioned, inscriptions are our only written records for the study of early Buddhism. There are no other social documents, there are no letters, no diaries, no early chronicles, no economic accounts, nothing. I leave behind the limited foreign accounts, mainly Chinese and later Arabic. No examples of early local literature survive, no palm leaf or paper manuscripts. So we depend a lot on inscriptions. And in addition to the inscriptions, sources for the reconstruction of the history of the period are material culture, the built environment, and traces in the ecological record. And of course, material culture, or the spiritual come material culture, is very well represented here in this exhibition. Pali is the scriptural language of the texts of the Theravamsa or Theravada school. Ancient Pali inscriptions have only been found in 2 geographical areas, or Pali epigraphic zones. Both are in the region that we now call Southeast Asia. One is in the lower Irrawaddy Valley in lower Burma. I will call it the Pew zone. The other is in the Chauphria Valley in lower Siam. Following convention, I will call it the Dwaravati zone. Dwaravati is purple, and Pew is sort of disappearing in the upper left corner in modern day Burma or Myanmar. These are the only zones of Pali used as an epigraphic language. There are no ancient or even medieval Pali inscriptions anywhere else. There are none in South Asia, India, Pakistan, or Sri Lanka. The inscriptions in the Pali zone have no Nikaya or school label. Can we propose that they belong to the Theravada? I believe that the answer is yes. One reason for this is the use of the Pali language itself. So far, Pali is only known as a scriptural language used by the Theravada and by no other schools. Another reason is that the citation inscriptions all agree with the Pali texts transmitted by the Theravada of Sri Lanka. The inscriptions date to 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, and the texts that we have today come from manuscripts based mostly in the 18th and 19th centuries. So there is very close agreement between these manuscript texts and the ancient inscriptions, which are not an extensive corpus, but there is a variety that we can check. A third reason for concluding that the Theravada was there is that there are a few non-canonical or post-canonical citations, and that these agree with or belong to texts transmitted within the Thera lineage and are not known elsewhere in the text traditions of other schools. Today we have time only for a brisk, if not breakneck, foray into the Dwaravati zone, the Siamese sector of Pali epigraphy. So we have to hold on to our hats. Pali inscriptions are mostly found in central Thailand, where Buddhist practice and devotion have left a large number of inscriptions in Pali on stone and in clay. Let me run through a few ideas about the use of Pali in the Dwaravati zone. The kingdom of Dwaravati has bequeathed a rich legacy of objects that reveals a refined and technologically developed metropolitan culture in which Buddhism and Brahmanism were practiced side by side. You can see some very fine examples of Dwaravati art in the exhibition. The inscriptions are almost all direct citations from the Pali texts rather than independent compositions. The most popular texts are the Ye Dhamma stanza, which my colleague Arlo has already spoken about this morning, in the Sanskrit form, Ye Dharma, the formula of dependent arising, or Paticcasamuppada, and the four truths of the noble ones. The four truths are given in several forms, including a bare list, citations of canonical sutras, and a post-canonical verse that summarizes the truths as the 12 aspects of the three turns of the wheel of the Dharma. There are also verses spoken by the Buddha as Dhammapadas or Udanas. There are no local compositions. What are the functions of epigraphic Pali inscriptions? Pali was used for empowerment, blessing, and display. Pali text functioned both invisibly and visibly. Invisibly when inscribed on slabs or tablets and installed within stupas, or also Buddha images, and visibly, when inscribed, to be seen. This is a practice found throughout Asia. In some cases, it is still being practiced. Installation texts were frequently prepared as deluxe editions, inscribed on gold plates. For example, the Golden Book from the Kinba Mound, about which you will hear more later this afternoon, from Janice Stargart. The Golden Pratityasamutpada assemblage from Java, about 20 golden plates with Sanskrit text on them, or the single plate gold inscription from Gao Xuai in southern Vietnam. Written texts and art intersect in several ways. Artifact and text are part of the same imaginary or thought world. They belong together. Texts are not only written on plates, as here, that imitate manuscript leaves. They are written on reliquaries, as, for example, the Kinba Mound reliquary, or the reliquary from Dev Nimori in Gujarat in western India. Both of these include dependent arising or pratityasamutpada among their texts. This is one of the cardinal texts which this morning Arlo pointed out, or discussed a verse in Sanskrit also dealing with this same subject, the dependent nature of all things. Texts are installed within or inscribed on images of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. Statues of the Buddha are consecrated by the recitation and chanting of texts. The texts invigorate and sanctify them. Display, Pali was inscribed on open and accessible objects like slabs and pillars. The display of text seems more common in Southeast Asian Pali zones than in India in general. The artifacts that we study were ritual objects, and their display during rituals before their final installation was an important part of the ceremony. One can argue that display and empowerment are moments and phases in the ritual lives of objects, rather than hard and fast functions. So the practices, monuments, and functions all overlap. Installation and display might be described as the warp and the woof of early Buddhist inscriptions. In Southeast Asia, the Pyu and Dwaravati societies shared in ritual practices of a wide Buddhistic world. They were all in touch. So, what can inscriptions tell us about history and language? I've already mentioned that I've already mentioned the name of Dwaravati as a zone of Pali inscriptions. We know the name of a kingdom, a state, a polity. Let us not call it an empire, please. Named Dwaravati. How the name entered the geography of modern historical studies is an instructive example of the dynamics of foreign, Tang Chinese, and local, Ayutthaya Thai, written sources and inscribed objects. The catalog of the exhibition has a very instructive article on the Chinese sources by Jeff Wade. The Sanskrit name Dwaravati was first known to modern scholarship only from the Chinese forms in the Tang Dynasty materials. But the name is now known from inscribed medallions found in central Thailand and from one stone base on a standing Buddha image from Nakhon Ratchasima at the gateway to the Korat Plateau. These metal medallions gave the first epigraphic and numismatic evidence of the name Dwaravati, apart from the Chinese sources. Many have been discovered in the course of the last century. Many of them are floating or unprovenanced artifacts in museums and private collections. Some provenance examples were recovered in a coin hoard found at Kok Chang Din in Utong. The Wat Jan Tuk inscription is the only stone inscription mentioning Dwaravati. Engraved on the circular base of a large standing stone image of the Tathagata, a statue of the Buddha which now is lost, the fragmentary epigraph mentions that records that the statue was set up by a queen, Devi, presumably a daughter of the Lord of Dwaravati. This inscription is in Sanskrit. Does this tell us anything about the school or the form of Buddhism involved? I'm afraid it does not. It is a dedication, a donative record, emanating from the court. Donative records were written either in vernaculars or in Sanskrit, the language of the educated elite. They do not coincide with scriptural languages. The scriptural language may be Pali, as in the inscriptions that I have shown, but the official or court language, Sanskrit or vernacular. Other examples of languages used in Dwaravati include seals and sealings in Sanskrit and dedications in Old Mon. And from the examples that I've shown so far, you can see that the use of both Pali and here Old Mon is often very calligraphic. There's great care put into making the letters balanced and beautiful. And sometimes we have a clear combination of Old Mon and Pali, as in the case of this terracotta stupa. There are a fair number of examples of these from central Thailand. To conclude, let us take a dash down the Malay Peninsula. Although admittedly after lunch a leisurely cruise would be more enjoyable. The peninsula, starting from about the region of Chaya in the center of the Thai portion and down to Malaya, belongs to another epigraphic zone, not to the Pali zone as regards text citations. That is, it belongs to a Sanskrit zone. In the peninsula, we find evidence for the same practices as in Pali Dwaravati. Above all, installation. But here, the language used is Sanskrit. There are no Pali inscriptions. The peninsula was a crossroads for Buddhists from South Asia and from East Asia. There was a lot of crisscrossing. Its practices and artifacts intersect with those of its near and cultural neighbors. Inscriptions of Sanskrit verses on relief stupas. There is one relief in the exhibition from Malaysia. Inscriptions with Sanskrit verses reveal a network that stretches from Kedah in North Malaysia to Borneo to Java, and stone bar inscriptions are drawn from a Mahayana sutra. Most common are the clay tablets, or sanchaka, often known by the Tibetan name tsatsa. These depict this has this Om Ye Te Swaha, which again Arlo Griffiths spoke about this morning. These depict Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and stupas, bear most commonly the Ye Dharma stanza in Sanskrit. There are also inscriptions on the Four Truths from Yarang in Pattani and from Khao Nui in Trang province. These are in central Malay Peninsula in Thailand. This is a very recent discovery found in a big limestone cave in some numbers. They were reproduced in numbers for making merit and then installed in the caves. Again, installation empowerment. These are a bare enumeration. in Sanskrit, but they link up with 4 truth inscriptions in southern Vietnam at Go Xoai and at My Tan, and of course with the Pali tradition of Dwaravati that I mentioned. There are also several 4 truth inscriptions from India, including one from Sarnath. These are tiny clay tablets made from molds, so we can call them stamped tablets or molded tablets or impressed tablets, and often they are called votive tablets. This concern for the doctrine, this respect for the power of the written word, even or especially the bare bones of the doctrine, that is, the 4 truths and dependent arising, binds the Buddhist communities of mainland Southeast Asia together and further connects them to a broader Buddhistic world. I have been discussing mainland Southeast Asia, mainly Thailand, and you could see many of the same points in Arlo Griffith's talk this morning. To uncover these doctrinal and textual intersections helps us to follow the path of ritual and textual development of Buddhism in Southeast Asia. Inscriptions are an invaluable guide in the endeavor to rediscover the lost kingdoms, the entrepot and the outposts of the Dharma in early Southeast Asia. Thank you for your attention.